I ordered a husband, not a stranger with a gun. The words tore from Evelyn Grace's throat as the tall figure stepped off the train, revolver glinting at his hip. Red Hollow, 1881, a town where dreams came to die and secrets arrived by rail. What she expected was love. What she got was a gunfighter with cold eyes and a past soaked in blood. This is their story. Stay until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale travels across the world. The afternoon sun hung low over Red Hollow, like a copper coin losing its shine, casting long shadows across the weathered planks of the train platform. Dust devils swirled down Main Street, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain that would never come. Evelyn Grace stood alone on that platform, her fingers trembling as they clutched the marriage papers that represented everything she dared to hope for in this unforgiving territory. She was 24 years old, which in 1881 meant she was dangerously close to being considered a spinster. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though a few rebellious strands had escaped to frame her heart-shaped face. She wore her best dress, a modest blue calico that had seen better days but was clean and pressed with the kind of care that spoke of dignity maintained against impossible odds. The platform wasn't crowded. Red Hollow wasn't the kind of town that drew crowds for anything except hangings and the occasional traveling medicine show. Old Pete Mackenzie leaned against the station house, whittling a piece of cedar and pretending not to watch her. Mrs. Henderson from the general store stood near the water tower with her daughter Clara, both of them wearing expressions that mixed curiosity with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Evelyn knew what they were thinking. Everyone in Red Hollow knew her story by now. How she'd lost her father to consumption 2 winters ago, how the bank had threatened to take their little homestead on the edge of town, how she'd done what desperate women had done since the railroads opened up the West. She'd placed an advertisement in the Matrimonial Times. Respectable woman, educated, good cook, seeks honest husband for companionship and mutual support. Must be of good character and willing to work hard. No drinkers or gamblers. The responses had been few. Most men heading west wanted young girls, barely 16, who they could mold like clay. But one letter had stood out. The handwriting had been careful, almost elegant. The words had been thoughtful, even poetic. Dear Miss Grace, it had begun. I read your advertisement with great interest. I'm a man of 30 years, a farmer by trade, seeking to establish a homestead in your territory. I do not drink spirits, I do not gamble, and I believe in the value of honest work and mutual respect between husband and wife. I have some education and enjoy reading when time permits. If you would consent to correspondence, I would be honored to learn more about you and share more about myself. Respectfully, Samuel Garrett. They had exchanged letters for 4 months. Samuel had written about his plans for the farm, about the vegetables he would grow and the livestock he hoped to raise. He had quoted Shakespeare and Robert Burns. He had asked thoughtful questions about her life, her dreams, her fears. He had seemed kind, gentle, safe. And now he was arriving on the 4:17 train from Denver, and in less than an hour she would be married to a man she had never seen. The distant whistle of the train echoed across the prairie, and Evelyn's heart began to hammer against her ribs. This was it, the moment that would define the rest of her life. She smoothed her dress with shaking hands and took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions churning in her chest. Fear, hope, excitement, terror. The train rounded the bend, a massive iron beast belching black smoke into the pristine sky. The ground beneath her feet began to vibrate, and the whistle screamed again, louder now, urgent and somehow mournful. The brakes squealed as the locomotive began to slow, and Evelyn felt the world tilt slightly, as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff and the ground was crumbling beneath her. "You all right, Miss Evelyn?" Old Pete called out, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern. She managed to nod, not trusting her voice. The train was slowing now, cars clanking and groaning as they settled into their reduced speed. She could see faces in the windows, tired travelers, hopeful prospectors, women in fancy hats heading to some distant city. Which one was Samuel? Which face belonged to the man who would become her husband before the sun set tonight? The train hissed to a complete stop, steam billowing from beneath the cars like dragon's breath. The conductor stepped down first, placing his step stool with practiced efficiency. Then the passengers began to disembark. an elderly couple, moving slowly, helping each other down. A businessman in a bowler hat, already looking around with the calculating eyes of someone seeking opportunity. A woman with 3 small children, all of them dusty and exhausted. A young man, barely 20, with the soft hands of someone who had never done a day's hard labor in his life. And then he appeared. The moment Evelyn saw him, every muscle in her body went rigid with shock. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to block out the dying sun. He wore a long duster coat, the kind favored by men who spent long days in the saddle, and it was covered in the dust of hard travel. His hat was pulled low over his face, but even from a distance, Evelyn could see the hard line of his jaw, the way he moved with the coiled tension of a predator, always ready to spring. And the gun. God in heaven, the gun. It hung from his hip in a well-worn holster, the grip polished smooth from years of use. Not the kind of pistol a farmer might carry for protection against coyotes. This was a weapon made for killing men. He stepped onto the platform with the deliberate movements of someone assessing threats, his eyes, cold and gray as winter steel, scanning the small crowd with an intensity that made Evelyn's blood run cold. His gaze swept past her, then returned, locking onto her face with an impact that felt almost physical. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The train's engine continued to hiss and settle. Old Pete's whittling knife had gone still. The stranger took a step toward her, and Evelyn's paralysis broke. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible even to herself. Then louder, her voice rising with panic and disbelief. "No!" He kept coming, his boots heavy on the wooden planks, and Evelyn found herself backing up, her marriage papers clutched against her chest like a shield that could somehow protect her from this nightmare. "Miss Grace?" His voice was rough, like gravel under wagon wheels, with none of the gentle cadence she had imagined from Samuel's letters. "Stay back!" The words burst from her in a rush of terror and outrage. "I ordered a husband, not a stranger with a gun." The platform went absolutely silent. Even the train seemed to quiet in the wake of her desperate cry. Mrs. Henderson gasped audibly. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Old Pete had stood up, his whittling forgotten, his weathered face creased with concern. The stranger stopped, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat brim. For a long moment, he simply stood there, studying her with those unsettling gray eyes that seemed to see right through her careful composure to the terrified woman beneath. "Ma'am," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "I understand this ain't what you expected. But we need to talk." "Talk?" Evelyn's voice broke on the word, years of carefully maintained dignity crumbling in the face of this catastrophe. "Talk about what? About how you're not Samuel Garrett? About how everything in those letters was a lie?" Something flickered across his face. It might have been regret, or it might have been nothing at all. His hand moved, and Evelyn flinched, but he was only reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and a folded piece of paper. "This is for you," he said, extending them toward her but making no move to close the distance between them. "And I can explain everything, but not here. Not like this." Evelyn stared at the offered items as if they were venomous snakes. "Who are you?" "Name's Wyatt Kane." He said it simply, without elaboration, as if the name should mean something to her. It didn't, but the way he said it made her skin prickle with unease. "Where is Samuel Garrett?" she demanded, finding strength in her anger. "Where's the man I've been writing to for 4 months? The man who promised me a home and a future?" Wyatt's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Samuel Garrett is dead, ma'am. Died 3 weeks ago in Denver. I'm sorry." The world tilted again, and this time Evelyn thought she might actually fall. Dead. The kind, gentle man who had written her poetry and asked about her favorite flowers was dead. And in his place stood this gunfighter with his cold eyes and his weapon and his complete and utter wrongness. "Then why are you here?" she whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving only a hollow, aching despair. "Why did you come?" "Because the wedding was already arranged," Wyatt said, his voice still carefully neutral. "Because you sent the deposit for the marriage license and the ceremony. Because Samuel asked me, with his dying breath, to make sure you were taken care of." "Taken care of?" The laugh that escaped Evelyn was brittle and sharp. I don't need to be taken care of by a stranger. I needed a husband, a partner, someone who could help me keep my home and build a life. What could you possibly offer me? For the first time, something that might have been pain crossed Wyatt's scarred features. Protection, he said quietly. A name, a legal claim to keep the bank from taking your property. At what cost? Evelyn shot back. What do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Kane? Because men like you don't do anything out of the goodness of their hearts. His eyes hardened. Men like me? Gunfighters, killers. She was trembling now, fear and fury and grief all tangled together in her chest. Don't try to tell me that's not what you are. I can see it in the way you move, the way you watch everything like you're expecting an ambush. That gun isn't for show. No, ma'am, it isn't, Wyatt agreed. And you're right about what I am. But Samuel was my friend, one of the few I had, and he died asking me to honor his commitment to you. So here I am. The ceremony is scheduled for 6 o'clock at the church. You can go through with it and have the legal protection of a husband, or you can turn me away and take your chances with the bank. Choice is yours. The casual way he laid out her options made Evelyn want to scream, as if it were that simple, as if she could just accept this complete reversal of everything she'd planned and hoped for. I need time to think, she said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to control it. You've got until 6 o'clock, Wyatt replied. He set the velvet box and the folded paper on the edge of the platform railing, then touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been respectful under different circumstances. I'll be at the Silver Spur Saloon if you decide you want to talk before then. Whatever you choose, Miss Grace, I'll abide by it. He turned and walked away, his long duster swirling around his legs, his boots striking the wooden planks with the confidence of a man who knew exactly how dangerous he was. Evelyn watched him go, her mind reeling, unable to process the complete disaster her carefully planned future had become. Miss Evelyn? Mrs. Henderson had approached, her face creased with concern. Are you all right, dear? What in heaven's name was that about? Evelyn couldn't answer. She reached for the velvet box with trembling fingers and opened it. Inside was a simple gold band, nothing fancy, but well-made and clearly expensive. The folded paper was a letter, written in Samuel's familiar handwriting. The date was just 2 days before he died. My dearest Evelyn, it began, and her vision blurred with tears. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and Wyatt Kane has honored his promise to deliver it to you. I know this is not what you expected or hoped for, and for that I am more sorry than words can express. You deserve the life I promised you, the farm, the partnership, the quiet happiness of two people building something together. But fate, it seems, had other plans. I contracted pneumonia in Denver and did not have the strength to fight it. In my final hours, I thought of you constantly, of your letters that brought light to my lonely days, of the future we had planned together, of the terrible injustice of leaving you stranded without the help you needed. Wyatt Kane is not the man I am. He is harder, more dangerous, marked by violence and loss in ways that I was blessed to avoid. But he is also the most honorable man I have ever known. When I asked him to take my place, to go to Red Hollow, and fulfill my commitment to you, he agreed without hesitation, knowing full well that it would cost him dearly. I am not asking you to love him, Evelyn. I am not even asking you to like him. But if you can find it in your heart to accept this arrangement, even temporarily, I believe you will be safe in ways that I could never have kept you safe. Wyatt Kane may be a gunfighter, but he is also a man of his word. If he promises to protect you, he will do so with his life, if necessary. The choice, as always, is yours. But know that my last thoughts were of your happiness and safety, and my last hope was that Wyatt could provide both, even if in ways neither of us anticipated. With deepest respect and regret, Samuel Garrett. Evelyn read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before she finally folded it carefully and placed it back in her pocket. The sun was lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She had less than 2 hours to make a decision that would determine the entire course of her life. Miss Evelyn? Mrs. Henderson tried again. Can we help you with anything? I need to go home, Evelyn said, her voice hollow. I need to think. The walk back to her small homestead at the edge of town felt like it took hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. The house her father had built stood silent and empty, the fence that needed mending, the roof that needed new shingles, the whole place carrying the weight of dreams that were slowly dying for lack of money and help. Inside, Evelyn collapsed into her father's old chair and stared at the wall, trying to make sense of the impossible situation. She could refuse. She could send Wyatt Kane away and face the bank alone. But the bank had already given her 2 extensions, and the loan officer had made it clear there would be no more. Without a husband, without someone to help work the land and prove it was productive, she would lose everything. Or she could go through with the ceremony, marry a complete stranger, a gunfighter, a man who carried death on his hip and danger in his eyes, a man who was nothing like the gentle farmer she had dreamed of. But a man who, according to Samuel's letter, was honorable, who kept his promises, who might actually be able to protect her in ways Samuel never could. As the sun sank lower and the shadows grew longer, Evelyn found herself thinking about her father, about the stories he used to tell of the early days in Red Hollow, when survival meant making hard choices and living with the consequences. He had always told her that life on the frontier required strength, not just of body but of spirit, that sometimes the brave choice and the safe choice were very different things. At 5:45, Evelyn made her decision. She changed into her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in cedar and lavender. It was simple, made of cream-colored silk that had yellowed slightly with age, but it fit her perfectly. She pinned up her hair with her mother's pearl combs and took one last look at herself in the small mirror by the door. The woman looking back at her was pale but composed, frightened but determined. She looked like someone about to walk into a storm with her eyes open. "God help me," she whispered to her reflection. Then she picked up her shawl and walked out into the gathering dusk, heading toward the small church at the center of town. The church was lit with candles, golden light spilling from the windows into the twilight. Reverend Matthews stood at the altar, his Bible open, looking deeply uncomfortable with the whole situation. Wyatt Kane stood to one side, his hat now removed, revealing dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. He had cleaned up, she noticed. The dust was gone from his coat, and he wore a clean shirt beneath it, though he had not removed the gun. There were witnesses, Mrs. Henderson and her husband, Old Pete, and a few other townspeople who had gathered out of curiosity or concern. The small church felt cavernous and empty despite them. Wyatt turned as Evelyn entered, and for just a moment, something that might have been admiration flickered in those cold gray eyes. He straightened slightly, and she saw him swallow hard, as if he too was nervous about what they were about to do. "Miss Grace," Reverend Matthews said gently, "are you certain about this? No one would fault you for—" "I'm certain," Evelyn interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. She walked down the short aisle, her shoes echoing on the wooden floor, until she stood beside Wyatt Kane. He was even taller up close, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Let's get this done." The ceremony was brief. The Reverend seemed eager to complete it quickly, perhaps sensing the tension that crackled in the air between the bride and groom. The traditional words, honor, cherish, in sickness and health, felt hollow and strange when spoken between 2 people who had known each other for less than an hour. When it came time for the ring, Wyatt's hands were surprisingly gentle as he slipped the gold band onto her finger. His skin was rough with calluses, his fingers scarred, but his touch was careful, almost reverent. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Matthews said, sounding relieved. "You may kiss the bride." Wyatt looked at Evelyn, a question in his eyes. She gave the tiniest shake of her head, and he nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding. Instead of a kiss, he simply took her hand and squeezed it once, briefly, before releasing it. "Thank you," he said quietly, so only she could hear. Evelyn didn't reply. She couldn't. Her throat was too tight with emotions she couldn't even name. They signed the marriage certificate, the witnesses added their names, and just like that, Evelyn Grace became Evelyn Kane, wife to a gunfighter she didn't know and hadn't chosen. As they walked out of the church together into the cool evening air, Evelyn felt as if she were moving through a dream. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be her life. "I've taken a room at the boarding house," Wyatt said as they stood on the church steps. "2 rooms, actually. Figured you'd want your space. I'll come by your place in the morning and we can discuss how you want to handle things going forward." Evelyn stared at him in surprise. "You're not—" You don't expect to—" "No, ma'am," he said firmly. "I made a promise to help you keep your home and your land. That's what I intend to do. The rest, well, that's up to you. If and when you want more from this arrangement, you tell me. Until then, I'm just the name on the paper that keeps the bank from taking what's yours." The relief that flooded through her was so intense it made her knees weak. "Thank you," she whispered. He tipped his hat to her. "Get some rest, Mrs. Kane. Tomorrow we'll figure out what needs doing around your place." He walked away into the darkness, leaving Evelyn standing alone on the church steps, a married woman who had never felt more alone in her life. She went home to her empty house, climbed into her empty bed, and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally claimed her. Her last thought before sleep took her was of those cold gray eyes and the question that burned in her mind. Who exactly was Wyatt Kane, and what had she just gotten herself into? The answer would come soon enough, sooner than she wanted, because in the darkness beyond Red Hollow, men were riding hard toward the town, men who had been searching for Wyatt Kane for months. And when they arrived, Evelyn would discover that the gun on her new husband's hip wasn't just for show. It was the only thing that stood between her and a death she didn't even know was coming. Dawn came to Red Hollow with a whisper of wind that carried the scent of distant rain, and something else, something darker that Evelyn couldn't quite name. She had barely slept, her mind churning through the events of the previous day like a mill wheel grinding the same grain over and over until there was nothing left but dust and regret. The gold band on her finger felt heavy, foreign, like a shackle she had willingly placed on herself. Mrs. Evelyn Kane. The name tasted bitter on her tongue as she dressed in her work clothes and braided her hair with trembling fingers. Somewhere in town, her husband, God, what a strange word that was now, was waking up in a boarding house room, and soon he would come here, to her home, and they would have to figure out how to live this lie they had created. She was feeding the chickens when she heard the horse, not the sound of hooves on packed earth, but rather the absence of sound, the way the morning bird suddenly went quiet, the way the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn straightened slowly, her hand tightening on the feed bucket, and turned toward the road. Wyatt Kane sat astride a massive roan gelding, the kind of horse built for endurance and speed rather than farm work. He was dressed much as he had been yesterday, though the duster was gone, revealing a dark shirt and vest that made him look even more like what he was, a man accustomed to violence. The gun was still there, of course, riding his hip like a natural extension of his body. "Morning, Mrs. Kane," he said, dismounting with the fluid grace of someone who had spent more of his life in the saddle than out of it. His voice was rougher in the morning, like gravel that hadn't been smoothed by conversation yet. "Mr. Kane," Evelyn replied, keeping her tone neutral and her distance. The chickens scattered around her feet, disturbed by the presence of the stranger and the large horse. Wyatt tied the roan to the fence post and studied the property with those unsettling gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. She watched him take in the sagging barn, the fence that needed mending, the roof with its missing shingles, the well that needed a new bucket and rope. His expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his gaze. Calculation, assessment, the practical evaluation of a man who understood work. "You've been managing this place alone?" he asked, his eyes moving from the property to her face. "Since my father died, yes," Evelyn said, lifting her chin slightly, defensive despite herself. "I've done the best I could." "Didn't say you hadn't," Wyatt replied mildly. "Just trying to understand what needs doing." He gestured toward the barn. "Mind if I take a look around, get a sense of things?" Evelyn wanted to say no, wanted to tell him to leave, that she had changed her mind, that this whole arrangement was a terrible mistake. But the morning sun was already warm on her shoulders, and she could see Mrs. Henderson watching from her porch 3 houses down, and the marriage certificate was signed and legal, and the bank would be expecting to see evidence of a working farm with a man to run it. "Go ahead," she said quietly. Wyatt nodded and walked toward the barn, his boots crunching on the dry earth. Evelyn watched him go, then forced herself to finish feeding the chickens, to collect the eggs, to go through the morning routine that had been hers alone for so long. But she was aware of him every moment, the way you were aware of a storm on the horizon or a predator circling in the darkness. He emerged from the barn after 20 minutes, his expression thoughtful. You've got good bones here, he said, surprising her. Structure's solid, just needs attention. Tools are well maintained. Your father knew what he was doing. Something in Evelyn's chest loosened slightly at the respect in his voice when he mentioned her father. He built it all himself, she said. Every board, every nail. He had plans to expand, to build a proper house instead of this cabin, but then he got sick and the money went to doctors and medicine, Wyatt finished quietly. I understand. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two strangers bound by law and necessity, neither quite sure how to proceed. Finally, Wyatt cleared his throat. I figure we need to establish some ground rules, he said. Make this arrangement work for both of us. Evelyn nodded, grateful for the practical approach. I'm listening. First thing, I meant what I said last night. I don't expect anything from you beyond what you're willing to give. This is a business arrangement far as I'm concerned. You need a husband on paper to keep this land. I'm providing that service. And what do you get out of it? Evelyn asked, the question that had haunted her all night. Men don't do things for nothing, Mr. Kane. What's your price? Wyatt's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might not answer. Then he said, a place to stay, for a while, until some business I have get settled. What kind of business? His eyes went cold and distant. The kind that's mine to handle. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine despite the warmth of the morning. Is it dangerous? This business of yours? Could be. Could it bring danger here? To this place? To me? Wyatt met her gaze directly, and she saw something that might have been honesty in those hard eyes. I aim to make sure it doesn't. But I won't lie to you, Mrs. Kane. I've made enemies. Most of them don't know where I am, and I intend to keep it that way. But if trouble does come, I'll deal with it before it touches you. That's not much of a reassurance, Evelyn said, her voice sharper than she intended. It's all I've got to offer, Wyatt replied. That and my word that I'll work this land, fix what needs fixing, and make sure the bank sees a productive farm when they come calling. In return, I sleep in the barn, take my meals separate unless you say otherwise, and stay out of your way as much as possible. When my business is settled, I'll leave if that's what you want. Or we can talk about making this arrangement more permanent. Your choice, always. It was a fair offer, Evelyn had to admit. More than fair, considering she had no other options. And there was something in the way he spoke, the careful formality of it, that suggested he understood exactly how vulnerable she was and was trying, in his rough way, to make her feel less so. All right, she said finally. We'll try it your way. But I have conditions too. Name them. No drinking, no gambling, no bringing trouble to my door if you can help it. And if I ask you to leave, you go. No arguments, no threats. You just go. Wyatt nodded slowly. Fair enough, you have my word. Your word, Evelyn repeated, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. How much is that worth exactly? Something dangerous flickered in Wyatt's eyes, and for just a moment, Evelyn saw the gunfighter beneath the careful politeness. It's worth everything, Mrs. Kane. I don't give it lightly, and I don't break it, ever. You can believe that or not, as you choose. But it's the truth. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Evelyn realized that despite everything, she did believe him. There was something in his bearing, in the way he spoke, that suggested a man who lived by a code, even if that code was written in blood and gun smoke. Then we have an agreement, she said. Wyatt touched the brim of his hat. I'll start on the fence. Should have the south pasture secured by sundown. He turned and walked back to his horse, pulling tools from the saddlebags with the efficiency of someone who had done hard work before. Evelyn watched him for a moment longer, then retreated to the cabin, her mind spinning with questions she didn't have answers for. The day passed in a strange rhythm of awareness and avoidance. Evelyn went about her chores, washing clothes, tending the garden, preparing bread dough to rise, while Wyatt worked on the fence. She could hear the steady rhythm of his hammer, the creak of new wire being strung, the occasional low voice as he spoke to his horse. It should have felt intrusive, having another person on her property, in her space. Instead, it felt oddly normal, as if he had always been there, a part of the landscape she had simply failed to notice before. At noon, she brought him water and a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried apples. He accepted it with a quiet, "Thank you, ma'am," and ate standing up, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon as if expecting trouble to appear at any moment. "Do you always do that?" Evelyn asked before she could stop herself. "Do what?" "Watch, like you're waiting for something bad to happen." Wyatt took a long drink of water before answering. "Habit, hard to break." "What kind of life teaches a man to live like that?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something ancient and tired in his eyes. "The kind you don't want to know about, Mrs. Kane." She should have left it at that, should have taken the hint and retreated to her safe cabin with its safe routines, but something made her push. "Were you a soldier?" "For a time." "And after?" "After I was a lot of things, none of them worth talking about over a peaceful lunch." Evelyn felt herself flush, embarrassed by her own curiosity. "I apologize, it's none of my business." "No," Wyatt said quietly. "I suppose it is your business now. You married me even if it was just on paper. You've got a right to know who you're tied to." He was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. "I was a lawman for a while, town marshal in a place called Deedridge up in Montana. Did that for 3 years. Was good at it, mostly because I was willing to do what needed doing when the law wasn't enough." "What happened?" "Killed a man I shouldn't have killed, or maybe I killed him exactly like I should have, depending on who you ask. Either way, it ended my career as a lawman." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Evelyn could hear the weight of old pain beneath the words. "After that, I hired out my gun to whoever could pay. Cattle barons fighting over water rights, mining companies dealing with claim jumpers, rich men who needed problems solved and didn't care much how they got solved." "You were a killer for hire," Evelyn said, the words dropping between them like stones into still water. "Yes, ma'am, I was." No shame, no pride, just acknowledgement. "Still am in some folks' eyes. That's the business I mentioned. Some people think I owe them something, either money or blood, depending on the grudge. I'm trying to stay ahead of them until I can settle accounts one way or another." Evelyn should have been terrified, should have told him to leave right then, marriage certificate be damned. But instead she found herself asking, "The man you killed when you were marshal, did he deserve it?" Wyatt's eyes snapped to hers, and she saw surprise there, quickly masked. "Most people don't ask that question. I'm asking." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "He was beating a woman. His wife. I'd warned him twice before, arrested him once. Judge let him go both times because the wife wouldn't testify. Third time I got there, she was already dead. He was standing over her with a fireplace poker in his hand and her blood on his clothes. Said she'd made him do it, said it was her fault for not having supper ready on time." Evelyn's stomach turned. "What did you do?" "I told him to drop the poker and put his hands up. He went for his gun instead." Wyatt's voice was still flat, but his hands had tightened into fists. "I shot him, center mass like I'd been trained. He died right there on his kitchen floor, next to his wife. And the town council decided that shooting an unarmed man in his own home, even under those circumstances, was conduct unbecoming of a marshal. They asked for my resignation. I gave it to them." "That's not justice," Evelyn whispered. "No, ma'am, it's not. But it's the law. And I learned that day that the law and justice aren't always the same thing." They stood in silence, the half-eaten lunch forgotten between them. Evelyn tried to reconcile the man before her with the story he had just told. A killer, yes, but also someone who had tried to protect the vulnerable, who had paid a price for doing what he thought was right. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. Wyatt nodded and handed her back the empty cup. "I'll get back to work. Fence won't fix itself." Evelyn returned to the cabin, her thoughts in turmoil. She had married a man even more complicated and dangerous than she had imagined. But she had also married a man who, in his own hard way, seemed to understand the difference between right and wrong, even if he didn't always live on the right side of that line. The afternoon wore on toward evening, the sun painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Evelyn prepared a simple supper, stew made from yesterday's chicken and the last of her root vegetables, and found herself setting 2 places at the table before she realized what she was doing. She had told Wyatt they would take meals separately. But the cabin felt too empty, too quiet, and the idea of eating alone while he sat in the barn with nothing but hardtack and jerky seemed unnecessarily cruel. She was still debating with herself when she heard voices outside. Not just Wyatt's low rumble, but another voice, higher, urgent. Evelyn moved to the window and felt her heart skip a beat. Wyatt was standing near the barn, and facing him was Tommy Chen, the young Chinese man who ran the laundry in town with his elderly father. But Tommy wasn't alone. He was supporting his father, Mr. Chen, whose face was bruised and bloodied, one eye swollen shut. Evelyn grabbed her shawl and rushed outside. What happened? Tommy looked up at her, his young face creased with worry and barely contained rage. The Danner brothers happened, Mrs. Kane. They came to the laundry this afternoon, drunk and looking for trouble. Started saying things, ugly things about my father. When he asked them to leave, His voice broke. Wyatt's expression had gone completely still, his eyes cold as winter ice. How many of them were there? 3, Tommy said. Clay Danner and his 2 brothers, Wade and Jack. They beat my father while I was out making deliveries. By the time I got back, they were gone, and he was lying in the street. Nobody helped him. Nobody even came to see if he was alive. Evelyn felt sick. The Danner brothers were well known in Red Hollow and the surrounding territory, and well feared. They ran a gang that rustled cattle, robbed stages, and terrorized anyone who crossed them. The local sheriff was either too afraid or too corrupt to do anything about them, and the townspeople had learned to look the other way when the Danners came to town. We need to get him to Doc Morrison, Evelyn said, already moving toward Mr. Chen, but Wyatt held up a hand, stopping her. Tommy, did they say anything? Give any reason why they targeted your father specifically? Tommy's jaw clenched. They said they were sending a message, said that anyone who does business with certain people needs to remember their place. I think... He hesitated, glancing at Evelyn. I think they might have been talking about you, Mrs. Kane. About your new husband. The world seemed to tilt sideways. What? Why would they... Because Clay Danner knows who I am, Wyatt said quietly, his voice carrying an edge like a freshly sharpened blade. We have history, bad history, and he's letting me know he's here. Evelyn stared at him in horror. You said you would keep your trouble away from me, from this place. You promised. I said I would try, Wyatt corrected, his eyes never leaving Tommy and Mr. Chen. And I will handle this, but right now we need to get Mr. Chen to the doctor. Can he walk? I think so, Tommy said. But Mrs. Kane, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring this to your door. I just didn't know where else to go. The sheriff won't help, and Doc Morrison's office is on the other side of town, and it's all right, Evelyn interrupted, making a decision. Bring him inside. We'll tend to his wounds here. I have bandages and salve, and it's closer than the doctor's office. Wyatt gave her a long look, something that might have been respect flickering in his eyes. Then he moved to help Tommy support Mr. Chen, and together they got the injured man into the cabin and seated at the table. Evelyn worked quickly, cleaning the blood from Mr. Chen's face with warm water and soft cloths, applying salve to the worst of the cuts. His injuries looked painful but not life-threatening. Bruises, a split lip, a nasty cut above his eyebrow that would need stitching. She worked with the calm efficiency her father had taught her, the same skills she had used when he was sick and dying. Wyatt stood near the door, his posture relaxed but his eyes watchful, one hand resting casually near his gun. Tommy hovered nearby, translating when his father spoke in Cantonese, his voice thick with shame and anger. He says he's sorry for troubling you, Mrs. Kane. He says this is not your burden to bear. Tell him it's no trouble, Evelyn said firmly, threading a needle with steady hands. Tell him he's welcome here, and that what happened to him was wrong. Tell him this town should be ashamed for allowing the Danner brothers to terrorize decent people. Tommy translated, and Mr. Chen's good eye grew wet with tears. He spoke again, his words coming in a rush. He says you have a kind heart. He says you remind him of my mother before she died. He says... Tommy's voice broke. He says, thank you. Evelyn had to blink back her own tears as she began stitching the cut above Mr. Chen's eyebrow. Tell him he's very welcome. As she worked, Wyatt asked quiet questions. What time had the attack happened? Had anyone else been hurt? Had the Danner brothers said anything else, given any indication of where they were going or what they planned next? Tommy answered as best he could, but it was clear the attack had been sudden and vicious, designed more to terrify than to gather information. When Evelyn finished with the stitches and had bandaged the worst of the wounds, Mr. Chen looked almost presentable, though his face would be black and blue for weeks. "You should stay here tonight," Evelyn said. "Both of you. It's not safe to go back to town in the dark, not with the Danner brothers out there." Tommy looked torn. "We couldn't impose." "You're not imposing. I'm offering." Evelyn glanced at Wyatt, expecting him to object, but he nodded slowly. "She's right. Safer here than in town, at least for tonight. I'll keep watch." "You can't stay awake all night," Evelyn protested. "I've done it before. I'll do it again." His tone left no room for argument. They settled Mr. Chen on Evelyn's bed over her protests, and she made up a pallet on the floor for Tommy. She would sleep in her father's old chair, and Wyatt would keep watch from the porch. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than sending the Chens back to town where the Danner brothers might be waiting. As night fell and the others settled into uneasy sleep, Evelyn found Wyatt on the porch, sitting in the shadows with his rifle across his knees. She brought him coffee and a bowl of the stew she had made earlier. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly, accepting the food. "Taking them in could complicate things." "They're people who needed help," Evelyn replied, sitting down on the porch step, keeping a careful distance between them. "What was I supposed to do? Turn them away?" "Most people would have, especially given who hurt them and why." "I'm not most people." Wyatt was silent for a moment, then said, "No, ma'am, I don't believe you are." They sat in silence, listening to the night sounds. Crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through dry grass. Finally, Evelyn asked the question that had been burning in her mind since Tommy and Mr. Chen arrived. "Who is Clay Danner to you?" Wyatt took a long drink of coffee before answering. "He's the brother of a man I killed." Evelyn's hands tightened in her lap. "Tell me." "About 6 months ago, I was hired to protect a rancher up in Wyoming, a man named Harrison. He'd been having trouble with rustlers hitting his herds, threatening his family. Hired me to put a stop to it. Turned out the rustlers were led by a man named Luke Danner, Clay's older brother." "What happened?" "I did what I was hired to do. Caught Luke and his crew red-handed with stolen cattle. Gave them a chance to surrender. Luke went for his gun instead." Wyatt's voice was flat, reciting facts like he was reading from a ledger. "I shot him. Clean kill. His crew scattered. Harrison paid me and I moved on. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. No, Clay Danner took it personal. Started tracking me, him and his brothers, and whatever trash they could hire on. They want revenge for Luke. Won't stop until they get it, or I put them down like I did their brother." Evelyn felt cold despite the warm night air. "And you came here, to Red Hollow, to my home, knowing they might follow you." "I didn't know they were this close," Wyatt said, and for the first time she heard something like regret in his voice. "I thought I'd lost them back in Denver. Thought I'd bought enough time to honor my promise to Samuel and get you settled before I had to deal with them. I was wrong." "So what happens now?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. Wyatt set down his coffee and met her eyes in the darkness. "Now I finish what I started. I find Clay Danner and his brothers, and I end this, before they can hurt anyone else, before they can use you or anyone in this town as leverage against me. You're going to kill them. If they give me a choice, no. If they don't," he shrugged, "then I'll do what needs doing." Evelyn stood up abruptly, her hands shaking. "This is madness. You're talking about murder." "I'm talking about survival," Wyatt corrected, his voice hard. "Clay Danner and his brothers aren't men you can reason with or run from. They're rabid dogs that need to be put down before they bite someone innocent. I've seen what they do to people, Mrs. Kane. The things they've done to women, children, anyone who gets in their way. If I don't stop them, they'll keep coming, and eventually they'll hurt someone I care about." The last words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to examine. Evelyn wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, suddenly feeling very small and very vulnerable. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "You should be, but I promise you I will keep you safe, whatever it takes." Like you kept Mr. Chen safe? The words came out sharper than she intended, and she saw Wyatt flinch as if she had struck him. For a moment, his careful mask slipped, and she saw raw pain in his eyes. That's fair, he said finally. I failed him. I should have anticipated Clay would make a move like that, should have warned people. That blood's on my hands. He stood up, moving to the porch railing, his back to her. But I won't fail you, Mrs. Kane. Not while there's breath in my body. Evelyn wanted to stay angry at him, wanted to maintain the safe distance of righteous fury, but she found herself thinking of Mr. Chen's battered face, of Tommy's desperate fear, of all the people the Danner brothers had hurt over the years while law-abiding citizens looked the other way. What do you need me to do? She asked. Wyatt turned, surprise evident on his face. What? To help you end this. What do you need me to do? Mrs. Kane, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. This is my town, my home. If there's going to be a fight, I'd rather stand and fight than cower and hope the monsters pass me by. Wyatt studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. The careful distance he had maintained since arriving in Red Hollow seemed to crack slightly, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the gunfighter's hard shell. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish, he said quietly. Maybe both, Evelyn replied. Now tell me what we're going to do. They talked long into the night, Wyatt laying out what he knew about Clay Danner and his brothers, their methods, their weaknesses. He spoke of tactics and strategy with the calm efficiency of a general planning a battle, and Evelyn listened, absorbing every word, asking questions when she didn't understand. Somewhere around midnight, exhaustion finally caught up with her. Her head nodded forward and she jerked awake to find Wyatt watching her with an expression that might have been concern. Get some sleep, Mrs. Kane. I'll wake you if anything happens. You need rest too, she protested weakly. I'll rest when this is over. Go on now. Evelyn wanted to argue, but her body was crying out for sleep. She retreated to the cabin, checking on Mr. Chen and Tommy, both sleeping peacefully, before settling into her father's chair with a blanket. Through the window, she could see Wyatt's silhouette on the porch, still and watchful as a sentinel. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that she had married a stranger with a gun, just as she had cried out when he stepped off that train. But now, barely 2 days later, that stranger was all that stood between her and a violence she could barely comprehend. And despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty and the complete upheaval of everything she had planned for her life, Evelyn found herself grateful he was there. The darkness before dawn was when Evelyn heard the first gunshot. She jolted awake in the chair, her heart hammering against her ribs, the blanket falling to the floor as she scrambled to her feet. Through the window, she could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, brief bursts of orange flame that lit up the yard like lightning. Another shot rang out, then another, the reports echoing across the empty prairie. Wyatt was no longer on the porch. Tommy was already awake, crouched beside his father's bed with wide, terrified eyes. Mr. Chen had sat up, his battered face tight with pain and fear. Evelyn's mind raced, every instinct screaming at her to hide, to barricade the door, to protect the people in her home. But she had promised Wyatt she would stand and fight, and she meant to keep that promise. She grabbed her father's rifle from above the fireplace, checking quickly to make sure it was loaded. Her hands were shaking but steady enough. Tommy started to speak, but she held up a hand for silence, straining to hear what was happening outside. The gunfire had stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise had been, thick with tension and the smell of gunpowder drifting through the open window. Evelyn crept to the door, keeping low, and peered out into the pre-dawn darkness. Wyatt was crouched behind the water trough, his revolver in one hand, rifle in the other. She could see the rigid line of his shoulders, the way he held himself perfectly still, listening. Then she saw what he was watching. 3 men on horseback had positioned themselves at the edge of her property, just beyond the fence line Wyatt had repaired yesterday. Even in the dim light, Evelyn could see they were rough-looking, the kind of men who wore their violence like other men wore Sunday suits. The one in the center sat taller than the others, his hat pulled low, but she could see the cruel set of his mouth even from this distance. "Kane!" the man shouted, his voice carrying across the yard like a whip crack. "I know you're there. Saw you sitting on that porch all night like a dog guarding his master's house. Touching, really." Wyatt didn't respond, didn't move, but Evelyn saw his hand tighten on his gun. "My name's Clay Danner," the man continued, and Evelyn felt her blood run cold. "But I reckon you already know that, just like you knew I'd come for you eventually. You killed my brother, Cain, shot him down like a dog. Now I'm here to return the favor." Still Wyatt said nothing. The silence stretched out, taut as a wire ready to snap. Clay Danner laughed, the sound ugly and mean. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or are you too busy hiding behind that water trough to have a conversation like a man?" He gestured to the riders beside him. "These are my brothers, Wade and Jack. They're just dying to meet the famous Wyatt Cain, the man who's supposed to be so fast, so dangerous. You don't look so dangerous now, cowering in the dirt." "You done talking?" Wyatt's voice cut through the darkness, calm and cold as winter steel. "Because if you're here to settle accounts, let's settle them. But you leave the woman and her guests out of it. This is between you and me." "Oh, I don't think so," Clay said, and even from her position by the door, Evelyn could hear the smile in his voice. "See, I've been thinking about this for a long time. Thinking about how to hurt you the way you hurt me. And I realized killing you quick would be too easy, too merciful. No, what I want is to make you suffer first, make you watch while I take everything you care about, starting with that pretty little wife you just married." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She saw Wyatt stiffen, saw the flash of rage that crossed his face before he buried it under his iron control. "You touch her, and I'll make your death last days," Wyatt said, his voice so quiet and deadly that Evelyn felt goosebumps rise on her arms. "I'll make you beg for the mercy I showed your brother." Clay laughed again. "Big talk from a man with 3 guns pointed at him. Tell you what, Cain, you come out from behind that trough, nice and slow, hands where I can see them. You do that, and maybe I'll make it quick for the woman. Maybe I'll even let the Chinaman live. Maybe." Evelyn's grip tightened on the rifle. She had never shot at a person before, had never even imagined herself capable of such a thing. But listening to Clay Danner talk about her like she was nothing, like her life was just a tool to hurt Wyatt, something hard and furious kindled in her chest. She made a decision. Before she could second-guess herself, she stepped out onto the porch, the rifle held firmly against her shoulder, pointed directly at Clay Danner's chest. Her voice came out stronger than she expected, clear in the pre-dawn stillness. "I think you gentlemen should leave my property now." The reaction was immediate. All 3 men jerked their attention to her, and she heard Wyatt curse violently under his breath. Clay Danner's face split into a grin that made her stomach turn. "Well, well," he drawled. "The little wife has some spirit. I like that. Makes things more interesting." He nudged his horse forward a few steps, and Evelyn saw Wyatt shift slightly, readying himself to move. "You know how to use that rifle, sweetheart?" "My father taught me to shoot when I was 10 years old," Evelyn replied, keeping the barrel steady on Clay's chest. "I can hit a coyote at 200 yards. You're a much bigger target." "Mrs. Cain, get back inside," Wyatt said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Now!" "I don't think I will," Evelyn said, surprising herself with her own stubbornness. "This is my home, my land, and I won't have it threatened by men who attack old men and terrorize innocent people." Clay's smile faded slightly. "You've got sand, I'll give you that. But sand won't stop a bullet, and you're holding 1 gun against 3. How do you figure those odds work out for you?" "Better than you think," Evelyn said, "because if shooting starts, you're the first one who dies. I promise you that." The standoff held for a long, breathless moment. Then Wade, the brother on Clay's right, started to move his hand toward his gun, and everything happened at once. Wyatt exploded from behind the water trough, his revolver coming up with inhuman speed. Evelyn squeezed the trigger, the rifle's recoil slamming into her shoulder. Clay's horse reared as the bullet whined past his ear, missing by inches only because the animal had moved at the last second. Return fire erupted from the Danner brothers, bullets smashing into the porch railing and the cabin wall. "Get down!" Wyatt roared, and Evelyn dropped to the porch floor as wood splinters rained down around her. She heard Wyatt's gun bark once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Someone screamed, a high, pained sound that cut through the chaos. Tommy burst through the cabin door, dragging his father with him, and Evelyn scrambled to cover them with her body as more bullets chewed into the wall above their heads. Through the gun smoke and confusion, she saw one of the brothers, Wade, topple from his horse, clutching his shoulder. Jack wheeled his mount around, firing wildly, and she heard Wyatt grunt as a bullet found him. "No!" The word tore from her throat before she could stop it. She raised the rifle again, this time aiming for Jack, and fired. The shot went wide, but it was close enough to make Jack's horse bolt, carrying him away from the fight. Clay Danner was still there, his gun trained on Wyatt, who had taken cover behind a stack of firewood. Blood was spreading across Wyatt's left sleeve, but his gun hand was steady as he returned fire. The two men exchanged shots, both too skilled to waste bullets, each round placed with deliberate precision. Then Clay's gun clicked empty, and Evelyn saw the moment of calculation cross his face. He could reload, or he could retreat. Wyatt was already moving, closing the distance between them with deadly purpose. Clay chose retreat. "This ain't over, Kane," he shouted as he spurred his horse into a gallop. "Not by a long shot. I'll be back, and next time that woman won't be so lucky." He disappeared into the breaking dawn, his wounded brother Wade somehow managing to haul himself back onto his horse and following. Jack was already gone, vanished into the prairie. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, and suddenly the yard was quiet except for the ringing in Evelyn's ears and the harsh sound of her own breathing. She lowered the rifle with shaking hands and turned to find Wyatt leaning heavily against the woodpile, his face pale beneath the stubble, blood dripping from his arm to pool in the dust. "You're hurt," she said, the words coming out steadier than she felt. She turned to Tommy, who was staring at the scene with wide, shocked eyes. "Help me get him inside." Together they got Wyatt into the cabin and seated at the table. His coat was already soaked with blood, and when Evelyn cut away the sleeve, she found a deep furrow where a bullet had torn through the meat of his upper arm. Not fatal, but bad enough to need attention. "I told you to stay inside," Wyatt said through gritted teeth as she began cleaning the wound. "And I told you this was my home," Evelyn replied, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite their trembling. "I won't hide while men like that threaten what's mine. You could have been killed. So could you." She met his eyes, saw the pain and anger, and something else there, something that made her breath catch. "We're partners in this now, whether you like it or not." Wyatt stared at her for a long moment, then a sound that might have been a laugh escaped him. "You shot at Clay Danner. Actually pulled the trigger." "I missed," Evelyn said, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "You made him move his horse right when I needed him to. That's as good as a hit in my book." He winced as she probed the wound. "You did good, Mrs. Kane. Real good. Stupid, but good." "I learned from my husband," she said dryly. "He seems to specialize in brave stupidity." This time Wyatt did laugh, though it turned into a hiss of pain as she began stitching. Tommy brought her clean water and bandages, moving with quiet efficiency. Mr. Chen had settled into a chair, his battered face grave as he watched the proceedings. "They'll be back," Wyatt said as Evelyn worked. "Clay won't let this go. I wounded his pride as much as his brother. He'll gather more men and come back stronger." "How long do we have?" Evelyn asked. "Day? Maybe 2. Depends on how fast he can round up whoever he's got on his payroll." "Then we need to be ready." Evelyn tied off the last stitch and began wrapping his arm in clean bandages. "And we need help. We can't fight off a gang alone." "Who in this town is going to stand against Clay Danner?" Wyatt asked bitterly. "They couldn't even help Mr. Chen when he was being beaten in broad daylight." "Then we make them understand what's at stake," Evelyn said firmly. She finished with the bandages and stood back, surveying her work. "If Clay Danner and his gang can attack my home, terrorize my guests, and shoot up my property with no consequences, then nowhere in Red Hollow is safe. People need to understand that." Tommy spoke up from where he stood near his father. "She's right. My father and I will help. We owe you that much." "You don't owe me anything," Wyatt said. "Yes, we do," Mr. Chen said, his voice rough from his injuries but firm. "You defended us when no one else would. Now we defend you." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes at the simple dignity in the old man's words. She looked at Wyatt and saw that he was moved as well, though he hid it quickly behind his careful mask. "All right," he said. "Then we need to move fast. Tommy, can you get word to the sheriff? Tell him what happened here. Even if he won't help, it needs to be on record." Tommy nodded and hurried out. Evelyn watched him go, then turned back to Wyatt. "What else?" "We need to fortify this place. Board up windows, set up firing positions, gather supplies in case this turns into a siege." He stood carefully, testing his wounded arm. "And I need to teach you to shoot better. That rifle you've got is fine for hunting, but in a close fight, you'll want something with more stopping power." "You have an extra gun?" Wyatt reached into his coat and pulled out a smaller revolver, the metal dark and well-maintained. "Samuel's gun. He asked me to give it to you if things didn't work out the way he planned. Figured you might need protection out here." Evelyn took the weapon carefully, feeling the weight of it in her hand. It was lighter than her father's rifle, but somehow more deadly, more personal. This was a weapon made for killing at close range, for looking someone in the eye as you pulled the trigger. "Can you teach me?" she asked quietly. "Yes, ma'am. Soon as my arm stops bleeding." They spent the rest of the morning preparing for war. Wyatt directed the work despite his injury, showing Evelyn and Mr. Chen where to stack furniture for cover, which windows offered the best fields of fire, where to store water and ammunition. He moved through the cabin like a general inspecting fortifications, his tactical mind cataloging every advantage and weakness. Tommy returned near noon with grim news. The sheriff had listened to his report, written it down dutifully, and then explained that he couldn't spare any deputies to guard Evelyn's property. Too much territory to cover, too few men, and besides, hadn't Wyatt Kane brought this trouble on himself? The implication was clear. Red Hollow's law wasn't going to help them. "Coward," Evelyn said flatly when Tommy delivered the message. "He's afraid of the Danner brothers, so he hides behind procedure and bureaucracy." "Can't say I blame him," Wyatt said. "Clay's gang has probably 15-20 men if he calls them all in. That's more than the sheriff's department can handle, especially if half the deputies decide they'd rather be somewhere else when the shooting starts. So we're on our own." "Not entirely." Wyatt pulled on his coat carefully, favoring his wounded arm. "I'm going into town. There are a few people I need to talk to. People who might be willing to stand with us if I ask right." "You're in no condition to ride," Evelyn protested. "I've ridden with worse injuries than this. I'll be back before dark. You stay here. Keep watch. Anyone approaches who isn't me or Tommy, you shoot first and ask questions later. Understood?" Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was being foolish, that he needed rest and time to heal. But she saw the determination in his eyes and knew that arguing would be pointless. Wyatt Kane had made up his mind, and nothing she said would change it. "Be careful," she said instead. Something softened in his expression. "Yes, ma'am. I intend to." He left on his big roan gelding, sitting tall in the saddle despite the bandages hidden under his coat. Evelyn watched until he disappeared down the road toward town, then turned back to her preparations with renewed urgency. If Wyatt was risking his life to find allies, the least she could do was make sure they had a defensible position to come back to. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Mr. Chen, despite his injuries, insisted on helping, his skilled hands making quick work of the window barricades. They used whatever they could find, planks from the old chicken coop, barrels from the barn, even Evelyn's good furniture pushed up against the walls to create protected firing positions. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Evelyn found herself standing in the middle of her transformed home, hardly recognizing it. What had been a simple cabin was now a fortress, every window covered, every door reinforced, supplies stacked strategically throughout the rooms. It looked like a place expecting war, because it was. The sun was touching the horizon when Evelyn heard horses approaching. She grabbed her rifle and moved to the window, peering through a gap in the boards. Relief flooded through her when she recognized Wyatt's silhouette, but the relief turned to surprise when she saw he wasn't alone. 5 men rode with him. Old Pete Mackenzie was there, his weathered face determined beneath his battered hat. Frank Morrison, the town doctor, rode beside him, looking uncomfortable on horseback but grimly resolute. 2 men Evelyn didn't know well, ranch hands from the Henderson spread, flanked them, both carrying rifles. And bringing up the rear was Marcus Webb, the massive blacksmith whose forge anchored the east end of Main Street. Evelyn rushed outside as they dismounted, her eyes moving from face to face in wonder. "You came," she said, the words inadequate but heartfelt. "Course we came," old Pete said gruffly. Wyatt explained the situation, made us understand that if we don't stand now, we'll all be bowing to Clay Danner and his kind before the year's out. Some of us are old enough to remember what it was like before law came to this territory. Don't fancy going back to those days. "The Danner brothers are a cancer on this county," Dr. Morrison added, his cultured voice at odds with the rifle he carried. "Someone needs to cut them out before they spread further. I've treated too many of their victims to stand by any longer." Marcus Webb simply nodded, his hands, scarred from years at the forge, resting on a shotgun that looked almost small in his massive grip. "Where do you need me, ma'am?" Evelyn felt tears blur her vision. These men, most of them old enough to be her father or grandfather, had come to stand with her against a threat they could have easily ignored, had chosen to risk their lives because Wyatt had convinced them it was the right thing to do. "Thank you," she whispered. "All of you." "Save the thanks for when this is over," Wyatt said, though his voice was gentle. "Right now, we need to get everyone positioned and ready. Clay could come tonight or tomorrow, but either way, we don't have much time." They worked through the evening, Wyatt assigning positions based on each man's skills and the tactical necessities of defending the property. Old Pete and one of the ranch hands would cover the barn with clear sight lines to the approach from town. Marcus and the other ranch hand would fortify the smokehouse, giving them a position to catch any attackers in a crossfire. Dr. Morrison, who admitted he was a terrible shot but steady under pressure, would stay in the cabin to tend any wounded. Tommy and his father insisted on staying as well, despite Evelyn's protests that they had already done enough. "We're in this together now," Tommy said simply. "Besides, my father knows things about fire and smoke that might prove useful if it comes to that." As true darkness fell, they gathered in the cabin for a simple meal of bread, beans, and coffee. The mood was somber but determined, the kind of camaraderie that comes from shared purpose and shared danger. Evelyn moved among them, refilling coffee cups and listening to their quiet conversations, and felt something shift inside her chest. These men had come because Wyatt had asked them to, but they were staying because they believed in what they were defending. Not just her property, but the idea that decent people should be able to live without fear, that bullies like Clay Danner shouldn't be allowed to terrorize entire communities with impunity. It was a simple idea, but powerful. Powerful enough to make old men pick up rifles and young men risk their futures. Powerful enough to turn a homestead into a fortress and strangers into allies. Wyatt found her later when she stepped outside for a moment of quiet air. He moved carefully, his wounded arm held close to his body, and joined her at the porch railing without speaking. "I never thanked you," Evelyn said finally, "for bringing them here, for giving us a chance." "Don't thank me yet. We don't know how this is going to play out." "I know, but still." She turned to look at him, this man she had married out of desperation and necessity, who had turned out to be so much more complicated than she had imagined. "You could have run, could have left Red Hollow when you realized Clay Danner was close. Instead, you stayed. You stood. Why?" Wyatt was quiet for a long time, his eyes on the dark horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "Because I'm tired of running. Tired of being the man everyone fears or hates or wants dead. When I made that promise to Samuel, when I agreed to come here and be your husband on paper, I thought it was just one more job, one more obligation to fulfill before moving on to the next thing." He paused, then continued. "But somewhere between that train platform and right now, it became more than that. This place, these people, you're worth standing for, worth fighting for. Even if it costs me everything." Evelyn felt her breath catch. In the darkness, with danger circling like wolves outside their small island of light, Wyatt Kane had just given her something precious and rare, the truth of who he really was beneath the gun and the hard exterior. "We'll get through this," she said, though she couldn't know if it was true. "Together." Wyatt reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Together," he agreed. They stood like that for a long moment, hands clasped, facing the darkness side by side. And despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the very real possibility that they might not survive the next day, Evelyn felt something that surprised her. Hope. The night deepened around them, and in the distance, carried on the wind, came the faint sound of hoofbeats. Multiple riders, moving fast. Wyatt's hand tightened on hers, then released as he reached for his gun. "They're coming," he said quietly. "I know." Evelyn straightened her shoulders and picked up her rifle. "Let them come." Inside the cabin, she could hear the others moving into position, weapons being checked, last preparations being made. Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder, closer. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the violence about to unfold beneath them. And on the porch of her small homestead, Evelyn Kane stood beside her husband, ready to defend what was hers with everything she had. The gunfight was about to begin. The riders materialized out of the darkness like demons summoned from hell itself. At least a dozen of them, maybe more. They came fast and hard, their horses' hooves thunder against the hard-packed earth, and the moment they crossed onto Evelyn's property, the night exploded with gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness in staccato bursts of orange and white. Bullets whined through the air, thudding into wood and earth, shattering glass that had somehow survived the earlier barricading. Evelyn dropped behind the porch railing, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest, and raised her rifle with shaking hands. "Wait for clear shots!" Wyatt's voice cut through the chaos, calm and steady as iron. He was crouched beside her, his revolver already barking its deadly rhythm. "Don't waste ammunition!" From the barn, Old Pete and the ranch hand opened fire, their rifles creating a crossfire that caught two of the riders in a deadly convergence. One man screamed and fell from his saddle, hitting the ground hard and not moving. His horse bolted, dragging him by one caught stirrup until the leather broke and left him lying broken in the dust. The attackers scattered, some diving for cover behind the fence line, others circling to find better angles of attack. Evelyn saw Clay Danner among them, his face twisted with rage in the flickering light of gunfire. Directing his men with sharp gestures and shouted commands she couldn't quite make out over the roar of weapons. "There!" Wyatt pointed to a cluster of 3 men trying to flank toward the barn. "Take the one on the left." Evelyn swung her rifle, found the target, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, and through the smoke she saw the man jerk and clutch his leg, going down hard. Not a kill shot, but enough to take him out of the fight. She worked the lever action, chambering another round, her hand steadier now that action had replaced anticipation. From the smokehouse, Marcus Webb's shotgun roared like a cannon, the heavy buckshot shredding through the night. Someone else screamed, and Evelyn saw a rider go down, his horse rearing in panic. The other ranch hand was firing with mechanical precision, each shot carefully placed, conserving ammunition like Wyatt had taught them. But there were so many attackers. For every one that fell or retreated, 2 more seemed to take his place. Clay had brought his entire gang, every killer and thief on his payroll, and they were determined to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. A bullet struck the porch post inches from Evelyn's head, sending splinters flying. She flinched but held her position, returning fire at the shadow she'd seen moving near the well. The shadow jerked and fell, and she didn't let herself think about whether she'd just killed a man. There would be time for that horror later if she survived. Wyatt was firing with deadly accuracy, each shot finding its mark. She saw him drop a man trying to torch the barn, then another who had gotten too close to the cabin. His wounded arm didn't seem to slow him at all, though she could see blood seeping through the bandages, staining his sleeve fresh red. "They're trying to circle around to the back." Tommy's voice came from inside the cabin, high with fear, but steady. A moment later, his rifle cracked from the back window, and Evelyn heard someone curse in pain. The fight devolved into a nightmare of smoke and noise and the metallic taste of fear. Time lost all meaning. Evelyn fired until her rifle was empty, then reloaded with fumbling fingers while Wyatt covered her. She fired again, reloaded again, her shoulder bruising from the constant recoil, her ears ringing from the deafening reports. Then came a lull, sudden and eerie. The gunfire stopped as if someone had thrown a switch, leaving only the ringing silence and the moans of wounded men scattered across the yard. Evelyn's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her rifle. She looked around wildly, trying to count how many attackers were left, how many of their own people were still fighting. "Everyone all right?" Wyatt called out, his voice hoarse. Still here, old Pete responded from the barn. Smokehouse is holding, Marcus's deep rumble. We're good, Tommy from inside the cabin. Evelyn felt a rush of relief so intense it made her dizzy. They were all still alive, still fighting, but the relief was short-lived. Kane! Clay Danner's voice cut through the night, thick with rage, and something that might have been grudging respect. You're tougher than I gave you credit for, but this ain't over, not by a long shot. Then finish it, Wyatt shouted back. Stop hiding in the dark and face me like a man. Clay's laugh was ugly. Oh, I intend to, but first I'm going to burn everything you care about to the ground, starting with that pretty little homestead. Evelyn saw it then, riders moving along the perimeter, carrying torches that blazed bright against the darkness. There were 4 of them, spread out to hit multiple targets simultaneously. The barn, the smokehouse, the cabin itself. If those torches found their marks, they would all be forced into the open, easy targets for the guns waiting in the darkness. They're going to burn us out, she cried, desperation clawing at her throat. Wyatt's face was grim in the dim light. Mr. Chen, now! From inside the cabin came movement, and suddenly Mr. Chen appeared at the window, his battered face set with determination. In his hands he held several bottles, their necks stuffed with cloth. Tommy was beside him with a lit lantern, and Evelyn watched in amazement as the old man lit the cloth wicks and began hurling the bottles with surprising accuracy. The first bottle shattered against the ground in front of one of the torch-bearing riders, erupting in a wall of flame that sent the horse rearing and screaming. The rider was thrown, landing hard in his own fire, and the screams that followed made Evelyn's blood run cold. The second and third bottles found their marks as well, creating barriers of fire that forced the riders to scatter, their plan disrupted. The fourth rider managed to get his torch to the barn, and Evelyn's heart sank as flames began licking up the old wood. Pete, get out of there! Wyatt roared. Old Pete and the ranch hand burst from the barn, firing as they ran, and made it to the cover of the water trough just as part of the barn's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. The flames climbed higher, turning night into hellish day, and in the sudden brightness, Evelyn could see the full scope of the battle. Bodies littered the yard, some moving weakly, others ominously still. The Danner gang had been cut nearly in half, but those who remained were the hardest, the most vicious. And Clay Danner himself was still out there, still directing his men, still determined to see Wyatt dead no matter the cost. We can't hold much longer, Evelyn said, her voice breaking. There are too many of them. Then we make them pay for every inch, Wyatt replied. He reloaded his revolver with swift, practiced movements, his face hard as granite. We make them pay until they decide the price is too high. As if in response to his words, the attackers surged forward in a coordinated rush, using the burning barn as cover and distraction. They came from 3 sides at once, firing as they ran, and suddenly the defenders were fighting for their lives in close quarters. A man crashed through the cabin door, his gun raised, and Evelyn didn't think, just reacted. She swung her rifle like a club, catching him across the jaw with a sickening crack. He went down, and she grabbed his fallen pistol, firing at another shadow in the doorway. The gun bucked in her hand, the report deafening in the enclosed space, and the shadow fell backward with a grunt. Wyatt was beside her suddenly, his back to hers, creating a defensive position. They fought like that, 2 people moving as one, covering each other's blind spots, each shot and movement synchronized by pure survival instinct. Dr. Morrison emerged from the back room with a rifle that clearly hadn't been fired in years, but his hands were steady as he added his fire to their defense. Outside, Marcus Webb had left the smokehouse and was fighting hand-to-hand with 2 attackers, his massive fists doing as much damage as any gun. Old Pete was bleeding from a wound in his side but still firing, his aim true despite the pain. Tommy protected his father, who was throwing his last firebombs with grim determination. The battle became a blur of violence and desperation. Evelyn fired until her confiscated pistol clicked empty, then grabbed another weapon from a fallen attacker. Her dress was torn, her face streaked with powder burns and tears she didn't remember shedding. Wyatt was bleeding from new wounds, his movements slower but no less deadly. Then, through the smoke and chaos, Evelyn saw Clay Danner himself charging toward the cabin on foot, his face a mask of murderous rage. He had a gun in each hand and was firing wildly, screaming Wyatt's name like a curse. "Kane, face me, you coward! Finish what you started!" Wyatt stepped out onto the porch, fully exposed, his revolver hanging loose at his side. The sudden calm that came over him was terrifying in its completeness. He looked like a man who had made peace with death, who had walked this road so many times that it held no more fear for him. "I'm right here, Clay," he said quietly, though his voice carried across the yard. "Let's end this." "No." Evelyn lunged for him, trying to pull him back to cover, but Wyatt gently pushed her away. "Stay back," he said, his eyes never leaving Clay Danner. "This is my fight. Always has been." Clay stopped 20 feet away, his chest heaving, his guns trembling with rage or exhaustion or both. In the light of the burning barn, Evelyn could see the family resemblance between him and the brother Wyatt had killed. The same sharp features, the same cruel mouth. But where Luke Danner had apparently been a rustler and a thief, Clay was something worse. Clay was a man consumed by hate, hollowed out by it until nothing remained but the need for revenge. "You killed my brother," Clay said, his voice shaking. "Shot him down like a dog." "I gave him a chance to surrender," Wyatt replied. "He chose to draw instead. Same choice I'm giving you now. You can end this. Call off your men right away, and we'll call it done. Nobody else has to die tonight." Clay's laugh was broken, edged with madness. "Call it done? After everything? After you've cost me half my gang? After you've humiliated me in front of everyone?" He raised both guns, pointing them at Wyatt's chest. "No, this ends with you dead, Kane, one way or another." "Then you better not miss," Wyatt said calmly. The moment stretched out, taut as a wire. Evelyn's hand found her rifle, raising it slowly, her sights finding Clay Danner's chest. She saw Wyatt's eyes flick to her briefly, saw the almost imperceptible shake of his head. This was his fight, he was saying, his demon to face, and he needed to face it alone. But Evelyn was tired of letting men fight her battles, tired of standing aside while others decided her fate. This was her home, her life, and she would defend it with every breath in her body. Clay Danner's fingers tightened on his triggers. 3 guns fired as one. Wyatt's shot took Clay in the chest, dead center, a perfect kill shot that would have stopped a charging bull. But in that same instant, Clay's guns had fired too, both barrels aimed at Wyatt, and Evelyn's rifle had spoken its own deadly truth. Wyatt spun sideways as one of Clay's bullets caught him high in the shoulder, his gun flying from suddenly nerveless fingers. Clay staggered backward, Evelyn's bullet and Wyatt's having found their marks almost simultaneously. He looked down at his chest in disbelief, at the 2 blooming red flowers spreading across his shirt, and then his legs gave out and he fell to his knees. "Wyatt!" Evelyn was running before she realized she'd moved, her rifle forgotten, her only thought to reach him before he fell. She caught him as he swayed, taking his weight, feeling the hot blood soaking through his clothes. "I'm all right," he gasped, though his face was white with shock and pain. "Is he—" They both looked at Clay Danner, who was still on his knees, swaying like a tree about to fall. His guns had dropped from his hands, and he was staring at Wyatt with eyes that were already glazing over. "You?" Clay's voice was a wet whisper. "You should have killed me in Denver, when you had the chance. I gave you mercy," Wyatt said, his voice rough with pain. "More than you deserved." "Mercy?" Clay's laugh turned into a cough that brought up blood. "No such thing. In this world. You'll learn that. Eventually." He pitched forward onto his face and didn't move again. The silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn realized the gunfire had stopped completely. The remaining members of the Danner gang, seeing their leader fall, had broken and run, disappearing into the darkness on whatever horses they could find. The battle was over. They had won. But the cost was written in blood and fire and pain across every inch of the homestead. The barn was a total loss, flames still consuming what remained of the structure. Bodies littered the yard, some from the Danner gang, thankfully none from their own side, though several of their defenders were wounded. Dr. Morrison took charge with the calm efficiency of a man accustomed to dealing with trauma. He directed the others to bring the wounded into the cabin, his medical training overriding any squeamishness about the violence they had just survived. Marcus Webb had a bullet graze across his ribs, but was otherwise unharmed. Old Pete's side wound was ugly, but not deep. One of the ranch hands had taken a bullet through the arm that would require careful treatment, but should heal clean. And Wyatt had 3 new wounds to add to his collection: the shoulder shot that had disarmed him, a deep graze along his ribs, and another bullet that had passed clean through the meat of his thigh. Dr. Morrison worked on him with grim determination while Evelyn held Wyatt's hand, feeling him squeeze tight enough to hurt during the worst of the probing and stitching. "You need rest," the doctor said finally, tying off the last bandage. "Real rest, not the kind where you sit up all night watching for trouble. These wounds are serious, Mr. Kane. If you don't take care of them properly, infection could kill you faster than any bullet." "I'll make sure he rests," Evelyn said firmly, her voice brooking no argument. "Even if I have to tie him to the bed." Wyatt managed a weak smile. "Yes, ma'am." As dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, the survivors gathered in the yard, exhausted and battered but alive. The bodies of the Danner gang members had been laid out near the ruined barn, covered with whatever cloth could be spared. The sheriff would have to be notified, statements would have to be given, and there would be questions to answer, but all of that could wait. For now they simply stood together, watching the sun rise over Red Hollow, grateful to see another day. Old Pete was the first to speak, his weathered face creased with something that might have been pride. "We did it. We stood up to the worst this territory had to offer, and we won." "We lost the barn," Evelyn said quietly, looking at the smoking ruins. "Barns can be rebuilt," Marcus Webb rumbled. "Courage like what you showed tonight? That's something special, something rare." "We all showed courage," Evelyn replied. "Every one of us. We stood together when it mattered most." Tommy and his father approached, both looking exhausted but unharmed. Mr. Chen spoke in Cantonese, and Tommy translated, his voice thick with emotion. "My father says that you have honored us by letting us stand with you. He says that in his home country there is a saying, a debt of kindness must be repaid with kindness, a debt of honor with honor. You gave us both when we needed them most. We are forever in your debt." Evelyn felt tears spill down her cheeks, too tired and emotionally wrung out to hold them back. "You owe us nothing. You've more than repaid any debt tonight." The sound of horses approaching made everyone tense, hands moving toward weapons, but it was only the sheriff and 3 deputies, their faces a mixture of shame and relief as they surveyed the carnage. "We heard the shooting," Sheriff Edmonds said, his eyes not quite meeting anyone's gaze. "Came as soon as we could gather enough men." "The battle's over, Sheriff," Wyatt said, his voice heavy with irony and pain. "Thanks for your help." The sheriff had the grace to look ashamed. "I know we should have been here sooner, should have stood with you from the start, but Clay Danner and his gang, they've terrorized this county for years. Most folks were too afraid to stand against them." "Most folks," Evelyn said pointedly, "but not all. Some people have courage when it counts." The sheriff nodded slowly, looking at the faces of the men who had defended the homestead. "I can see that, and I give you my word that things are going to change around here. The Danner gang is broken. Most of them are dead or scattered. Those that remain won't find Red Hollow or any other town in this county hospitable anymore." "See that they don't," Wyatt said. He swayed slightly, and Evelyn moved quickly to support him. "That's enough for now. Sheriff, you can take your statements and ask your questions later. Right now, these men need rest and medical attention." The sheriff looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Evelyn's face made him think better of it. "Yes, ma'am. We'll come back this afternoon. In the meantime, I'll have my deputies start cleaning up here. Least we can do." As the officials began the grim work of dealing with the aftermath, Evelyn helped Wyatt back into the cabin. The interior was a disaster. Furniture overturned, bullet holes in the walls, broken glass, and spent shell casings everywhere. But it was still standing, still whole, still theirs. She got Wyatt settled on the bed, propping him up with pillows because lying flat made his shoulder and chest wounds hurt worse. He looked terrible, pale and drawn, his face tight with pain, his clothes stiff with dried blood. But he was alive, and that was all that mattered. "You should have stayed in cover," she said, her voice shaking with delayed reaction and fear. You could have been killed. So could you, Wyatt replied. You and that rifle, standing on the porch like some kind of avenging angel. You scared me half to death, woman. Good. Now you know how I felt watching you walk out to face Clay Danner alone. They stared at each other for a long moment, and then somehow they were both laughing, the sound edged with hysteria and relief and a dozen other emotions too tangled to name. The laughter turned to tears, and Evelyn found herself sobbing against Wyatt's good shoulder while he held her awkwardly with his uninjured arm. We're alive, she whispered against his chest. God help us. We're alive. We are, Wyatt agreed. His hand moved to her hair, gentle despite the calluses and scars. And that's thanks to you as much as anyone. You were incredible tonight, Evelyn. Brave and strong and everything I never expected to find in a mail-order bride. Evelyn pulled back to look at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since he'd stepped off that train. Not a stranger with a gun, not a killer to be feared, but a man. Complicated and damaged and dangerous, yes, but also honorable in his own rough way. A man who had stood between her and death without hesitation. A man who had brought allies to her defense and fought beside her like a true partner. A man she was beginning to realize she could love if she let herself. You're not what I expected either, she said softly. I ordered a farmer, a gentleman who would help me tend the land and build a quiet life. Instead, I got a gunfighter with more scars than smiles and enough enemies to fill a cemetery. Regret it? Wyatt asked, his eyes searching her face. Evelyn thought about it, really considered the question. She thought about the fear and the violence, and the way her whole world had been turned upside down in the span of a few days. She thought about the barn burning and the bodies in the yard, and the very real possibility that they both could have died tonight. And then she thought about standing back to back with Wyatt in the cabin, fighting as one. She thought about the way he had tried to protect her, even when it meant putting himself in danger. She thought about his promise to keep her safe and how he had kept it at great cost to himself. No, she said finally, I don't regret it. You're not what I ordered, Wyatt Kane, but I think you might be exactly what I needed. Something in Wyatt's expression shifted, softened, like ice melting in spring sun. He raised his hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away the tears and powder burns. I think you might be what I needed too, he said quietly. Didn't know it until I met you, but it's true. You make me want to be better than what I am. Make me want to stay in one place instead of running. Make me want to build something instead of just destroying. Then stay, Evelyn whispered. Not because you promised Samuel, not because of some obligation or debt. Stay because you want to. Stay because this is home now. Is that what this is? Wyatt asked, looking around the battered cabin. Home? It could be, if you want it to be. Wyatt's answer was to pull her close, careful of his wounds, and kiss her. It was nothing like the chaste touch they should have shared at their wedding ceremony. This was real and raw and full of all the emotion they had been holding back since the moment they met. Relief and fear and gratitude and the beginning of something that might, with time and care, grow into love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn rested her forehead against his. You need to rest, she said firmly. Doctor's orders. Yes, ma'am, Wyatt replied, but his eyes were warm. The coldness she had first seen in them burned away by fire and battle, and the simple human need for connection. Evelyn helped him settle more comfortably, then curled up beside him on the bed, too exhausted to care about propriety. Through the window, she could see the sun climbing higher, painting the world in shades of gold and promise. The barn was gone, but they would rebuild. The yard was scarred with violence, but time would heal those wounds. The danger had passed, at least for now. And for the first time since her father died, Evelyn didn't feel alone. She had a partner, a true partner, who would stand beside her through whatever challenges came next. She had proven to herself that she was stronger than she ever imagined, capable of defending what was hers with courage and determination. Most importantly, she had hope. Hope for the future, for the life they could build together, for the home they could create from the ashes of violence and loss. As exhaustion finally claimed her, Evelyn's last thought was that she had cried out on that train platform that she had ordered a husband, not a stranger with a gun. And she had been right. She had gotten both, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. The weeks that followed the battle transformed Red Hollow in ways Evelyn had never imagined possible. News of how a small group of townspeople had stood against the Danner gang spread across the territory like wildfire, carried by travelers and telegraphs until the story took on a life of its own. Some versions were more truth than fiction, others painted the defenders as larger-than-life heroes, but the core remained the same. Ordinary people had found extraordinary courage when it mattered most. Evelyn woke each morning in the chair beside Wyatt's bed, where she had kept vigil for the first week as infection threatened to claim what bullets had not. Dr. Morrison had come daily, his medical bag worn and his face grave, but his skilled hands had coaxed Wyatt back from the edge of death with a combination of modern medicine and sheer stubborn determination. "He's a fighter, your husband," the doctor had said on the 7th day, when Wyatt's fever finally broke and his eyes cleared for the first time since the battle. Most men would have given up by now, but he kept fighting. I think he had something worth fighting for. Evelyn had looked at Wyatt's sleeping face, still pale but no longer gray with the shadow of death, and felt something tight in her chest loosen. "Yes," she had whispered. "I think he did." Now, 3 weeks later, Wyatt was finally strong enough to sit up for extended periods, though his wounds still pained him, and Dr. Morrison had forbidden any strenuous activity for at least another month. Evelyn watched him struggle with the enforced idleness, this man so accustomed to action and movement, and found ways to keep his mind occupied even when his body had to rest. They talked, really talked, in a way they hadn't had time for before. Wyatt told her about his childhood in Missouri, about parents who had died when he was young and an older brother who had raised him until the war came and took everything. He spoke of his time as a soldier, of the things he had seen and done that still haunted his dreams. He confessed his years as a hired gun with neither pride nor shame, simply acknowledging them as part of the path that had led him here, to her. And Evelyn shared her own stories. Her mother's death in childbirth when Evelyn was just 12, leaving her to run the household while her father worked himself to exhaustion building their homestead. The loneliness of growing up without siblings or close friends, the fear of becoming a burden as she grew older and remained unmarried. The desperate hope that had led her to place that advertisement, and the crushing disappointment when the man who stepped off the train bore no resemblance to the gentle farmer she had imagined. "I was so angry at you," she admitted one afternoon as she changed his bandages with practiced efficiency. "I felt betrayed, like the universe was playing some cruel joke. Here I had finally gathered the courage to reach for happiness, and instead I got a gunfighter with enemies and secrets." "Can't say I blame you," Wyatt replied, watching her work with an expression she was learning to read, part admiration, part something deeper that made her heart beat faster. "I'd have been angry too in your position. But then you started to fix things," Evelyn continued, her hands gentle as she cleaned the healing wound on his shoulder. "The fence, the well, all those little repairs my father never had time for. And you brought allies when we needed them most. You stood between me and death without hesitation." She met his eyes, seeing her own emotions reflected there. "You became my husband in truth, not just on paper." Wyatt's hand covered hers, stilling her movements. "I'm still a man with the past, Evelyn. Still got scars and ghosts that won't ever fully leave. I can't promise you the quiet life you wanted." "I don't want promises you can't keep," Evelyn said softly. "I just want the truth. Can you be happy here? Building a life instead of running from one? Working this land instead of hiring out your gun?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications for their future. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing absent patterns on the back of her hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I never thought I'd have the chance to find out. Figured I'd end up in a grave somewhere, my name forgotten except by the people who hated me. But then I made a promise to a dying friend, and that promise brought me here, brought me to you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know if I can be the man you deserve, but I'd like to try, if you'll have me." Evelyn felt tears blur her vision, but they were good tears, born of hope rather than grief. "I'll have you," she whispered, "scars, ghosts, and all." The kiss they shared was tender, careful of his healing wounds, but no less meaningful for its gentleness. And when they broke apart, Evelyn saw something in Wyatt's eyes she had never expected to see there. peace. The work of rebuilding began in earnest as Wyatt grew stronger. The barn was a total loss, burned to its foundation, but the men of Red Hollow rallied in a way that surprised even the most optimistic among them. Old Pete organized a barn raising, and on a bright Saturday morning, what seemed like half the town showed up with tools and lumber and determination. Marcus Webb's forge had been working overtime, creating the metal hardware needed for the new structure. The Henderson brothers donated timber from their land, refusing to accept payment despite Evelyn's protests. Even Sheriff Edmonds appeared, looking uncomfortable but sincere in his desire to help, his shame over his earlier inaction driving him to make amends. "I should have stood with you from the start," he told Evelyn as he worked alongside the other men, sweat staining his shirt despite the cool autumn air. "Should have done my job instead of hiding behind excuses. What you and your husband did, what all of you did, showed this town what real courage looks like. I aim to do better from now on." "Then do better," Evelyn said simply. "Red Hollow needs a sheriff who protects all its citizens, not just the ones who aren't afraid to fight back." "Yes, ma'am. You have my word." Tommy and Mr. Chen were there too. The old man's bruises faded to yellow and green, but his spirit unbroken. He worked with quiet determination, and Evelyn noticed the way the other townspeople gradually included him and Tommy in their conversations, their shared experience of the battle having broken down walls of prejudice that had stood for years. By sunset, the frame of the new barn stood proud against the darkening sky, and the men gathered in Evelyn's yard for a meal she had prepared with help from Mrs. Henderson and several other town women. The mood was festive, celebratory, a community coming together not just to rebuild a structure, but to forge new bonds of friendship and mutual respect. Wyatt watched from the porch, still too weak to do heavy labor, but his eyes bright with something that might have been wonder. Evelyn brought him a plate of food and sat beside him, both of them surveying the scene before them. "Never seen anything like this," Wyatt said quietly. "People coming together just to help. No payment expected, no favors owed, just neighbors helping neighbors." "This is what community means," Evelyn replied. "What it's supposed to mean, anyway. We stand together because that's how we all survive." "I've lived in a lot of places," Wyatt said, "seen a lot of towns, but I've never seen one quite like Red Hollow. Never seen people quite like these." "Do you think you could make a home here?" Evelyn asked, her heart in her throat as she waited for his answer. "Really make a home? Not just stay until the next trouble comes calling?" Wyatt turned to look at her, and the expression on his face took her breath away. It was open, vulnerable, all the careful walls he maintained stripped away to reveal the man beneath. "I think I already have," he said simply. The autumn days grew shorter as October gave way to November, and with each passing week the homestead transformed. The new barn rose sturdy and strong, its beams of fresh-cut pine promising years of service. Wyatt, finally cleared by Dr. Morrison for light work, threw himself into the tasks of farming with the same focus he had once applied to survival. He learned from books Evelyn borrowed from the church library, asked advice from the Henderson brothers, and wasn't too proud to admit when he didn't know something. Evelyn watched him change, subtle shifts that accumulated into something profound. The hard edges that had defined him began to soften. He smiled more readily, laughed at old Pete's terrible jokes, and started to greet neighbors by name when they passed on the road. The gun still rode his hip. Some habits were too deeply ingrained to break. But she noticed he wore it differently now, less like a natural extension of his body, and more like a tool he hoped he'd never need to use. But the past had a way of catching up with men like Wyatt Kane, and it arrived on a cold November morning in the form of a telegram delivered by the station master's young son. Evelyn was kneading bread dough when she heard the knock, and she opened the door to find Billy Henderson shifting nervously from foot to foot, a yellow telegram clutched in his hand. "For Mr. Kane, ma'am," the boy said, his eyes wide with the importance of his mission. "Came in on the morning wire from Denver." Wyatt appeared behind Evelyn, his face going carefully neutral when he saw the telegram. He took it with a quiet word of thanks and a coin for Billy's trouble, then stood in the doorway reading it while Evelyn waited, her hands still dusty with flour, her heart beating too fast. "What is it?" she asked when the silence stretched too long. Wyatt handed her the telegram without a word. The message was brief, almost cryptic, but its meaning was clear enough. Harrison Ranch attacked. Stop survivors. Request your assistance. Stop situation desperate. Stop will pay double your usual fee. Stop reply urgent. Evelyn read it twice, then looked up at Wyatt's face. She saw the conflict there, the pull of old obligations warring with new commitments. Harrison was the rancher who had hired Wyatt to deal with Luke Danner, the job that had started this whole deadly chain of events. If Harrison's ranch was under attack again, it meant someone was continuing the Danner gang's work or seeking revenge for their defeat. "You're thinking about going," she said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded when her insides were churning with fear and something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy, not of a person, but of the life Wyatt had led before he came to her. "I'm thinking I owe Harrison," Wyatt replied carefully. "He paid me to solve a problem, and if that problem isn't solved, then I didn't finish the job." "You don't owe him anything," Evelyn said, her hands clenching in her apron. "You did what he paid you to do. You killed Luke Danner and scattered his crew. What happened after isn't your responsibility." "Maybe not legally, but morally?" Wyatt shook his head. "Harrison has a wife, 3 daughters. If something happens to them because I didn't finish what I started, what about what you started here?" The words came out sharper than Evelyn intended, edged with fear she couldn't quite hide. "What about the life we're building, the commitments you made to me, to this place?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Those commitments are exactly why I need to go. If I don't deal with this now, it'll just come here eventually, like Clay Danner did. I need to end it, make sure no one else from that gang decides to use you to get to me." "So you're going to leave me here alone while you ride off to fight someone else's battle?" "I'm going to protect what's mine by making sure the threats are eliminated before they can reach you." Wyatt's voice was strained, and she could see the pain in his eyes. "Evelyn, please understand. This is the last piece of my old life that needs settling. Once it's done, I can truly be free of it. We can build our future without shadows from the past hanging over us." Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to forbid him from going, wanted to point out all the ways this could go wrong, but she looked at his face and saw the truth there. He believed this was necessary, believed it was the only way to truly protect her. And she realized that trying to keep him here against his will would only create resentment that would poison everything they had built together. "How long?" she asked quietly. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Depends on what I find when I get there." "And if you don't come back?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with all the fears she had been trying not to voice. Wyatt crossed the distance between them and took her hands in his, heedless of the flower that dusted them both. "I will come back," he said fiercely. "I swear to you, Evelyn, I will come back. I have too much here to leave behind, too much to live for. Promise me you won't take unnecessary risks. Promise me you'll come home." "I promise." He pulled her close, and she went willingly, burying her face against his chest and breathing in the scent of him, soap and leather, and the faint smell of the wood oil he had been using on the barn. "I love you," he said quietly, the first time either of them had spoken those words aloud. "I should have said it before now, but I do. I love you, and I will come back to you." Evelyn's tears soaked into his shirt as she held him tight. "I love you too," she whispered. "Come back to me, Wyatt Kane. Come back to your wife." He left the next morning on his big roan gelding, his saddlebags packed with supplies and his weapons cleaned and ready. Half the town turned out to see him off, these people who had come to accept him as one of their own. Old Pete shook his hand solemnly. Marcus Webb clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to make even Wyatt wince. "Doctor." Morrison pressed a medical kit into his hands with stern instructions about wound care. Tommy and Mr. Chen approached last, and the old man spoke in Cantonese while Tommy translated. "My father says that you ride with the blessings of our family. He says that courage and honor will see you through whatever darkness you face. And he says that we will watch over your wife and your home while you are gone, as you watched over us in our time of need." "Tell him I'm grateful," Wyatt said, his voice rough with emotion. "And tell him I'll be back before the first snow." Then there was only Evelyn, standing on the porch of their home, her eyes dry now, but her heart breaking. Wyatt mounted his horse and rode close, leaning down to cup her face in his hand. 2 weeks, he said. 3 at most. And then I'm coming home for good." "I'll be waiting," Evelyn replied. But Wyatt, if you die on me, I will never forgive you. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his hard face into something almost boyish. Yes, ma'am. I'll keep that in mind. And then he was riding away, down the road that led out of Red Hollow and toward whatever waited for him in Wyoming. Evelyn watched until he disappeared from sight, then stood watching the empty road for long minutes after, as if she could will him back through sheer force of longing. The days that followed were among the longest of Evelyn's life. She threw herself into work, finishing the tasks Wyatt had started, tending the animals, preparing the homestead for winter. The new barn stood complete now, filled with hay they had put up together, ready to shelter the livestock through the cold months ahead. The townspeople rallied around her in Wyatt's absence. Mrs. Henderson stopped by daily with food and companionship. Old Pete and Marcus took turns checking on the property, making sure everything was secure. Tommy brought fresh bread from the bakery his father had started working at, having finally found acceptance in a town that had once viewed him with suspicion. But despite all the support, despite the busy work and the caring neighbors, Evelyn felt Wyatt's absence like a physical ache. She slept in their bed alone, the other side empty and cold, and dreamed of gunfights and blood, and Wyatt falling while she stood too far away to help. 2 weeks passed with no word. Then 3. As November gave way to December and the first serious snows began to fall, Evelyn found herself spending long hours at the window, watching the road, waiting for a rider who didn't come. On the 23rd day after Wyatt's departure, old Pete arrived at her door with a telegram. Evelyn's hand shook so badly she could barely open it, terror and hope warring in her chest. Situation resolved. Stop. Heading home. Stop. Arriving. Red Hollow, December 8th. Stop. Tell my wife I kept my promise. Stop. Evelyn read it 3 times, then pressed the telegram to her chest and sobbed with relief. He was alive. He was coming home. Her husband, her partner, her love was coming home. The 8th of December dawned clear and cold, the world blanketed in fresh snow that made everything look clean and new. Evelyn had barely slept, too anxious and excited to rest. She dressed with care in her best dress, the one she had worn to their wedding, and tried to tame her hair into something presentable. By noon, she was standing on the train platform where this whole impossible journey had begun, her heart racing as the familiar whistle echoed across the prairie. The train rounded the bend, black smoke against white snow, and her breath caught in her throat. This time she knew who would step off. This time there would be no shock, no fear, no desperate cry about ordering a husband instead of a stranger with a gun. This time she was waiting for the man she loved to come home. The train hissed to a stop, steam billowing, and Evelyn's eyes scanned the passengers eagerly. Then she saw him. Wyatt Kane. Looking thinner and more worn than when he had left, new lines of weariness etched around his eyes. But he was alive, whole, and the moment his eyes found hers, his face transformed with a smile that made her heart soar. He climbed down from the train, and Evelyn was running before she realized she had moved, propriety be damned, decorum forgotten. She crashed into him with enough force to make him stagger, and his arms closed around her, strong and solid and real. "You came back," she sobbed against his chest. "You kept your promise." "Always," Wyatt murmured into her hair. "I told you I had too much to live for. I meant it." They stood like that for a long moment, oblivious to the other passengers disembarking, to the townspeople who had gathered to witness the reunion. Finally, Evelyn pulled back enough to look at his face, her hands cupping his stubbled cheeks. "Tell me it's finished. Tell me the past is finally settled." "It's finished," Wyatt confirmed. "The last of the Danner gang's allies are either dead or scattered so far they'll never regroup. Harrison and his family are safe, and I made it clear to everyone in Wyoming that Wyatt Kane is retired from the killing business permanently. I'm just a farmer now, with a wife and a homestead and a future that doesn't involve guns." "Just a farmer," Evelyn repeated, smiling through her tears. "I think I can live with that." "Think you can live with me?" "I already am," she replied, "and I intend to keep doing so for a very long time." The kiss they shared there on the platform was witnessed by half of Red Hollow, and Evelyn heard Mrs. Henderson sigh romantically and old Pete's gruff, "About damn time," But she didn't care about the audience, didn't care about anything except the man in her arms and the future stretching out before them like an unwritten story. As they walked home together through the snow-covered streets, Wyatt's hand secure in hers, Evelyn reflected on how much had changed since that day in October when she had cried out her dismay at the stranger with a gun. She had wanted a simple farmer, a quiet life, safety and security without risk or danger. Instead, she had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found a partner who challenged her, who saw her strength and called it forth. She had found courage she never knew she possessed. She had found community and purpose and a love forged in fire and blood and the shared determination to build something worth fighting for. The homestead came into view, the new barn standing proud, smoke curling from the cabin chimney, everything ready and waiting for their return. Wyatt stopped at the gate, looking at it all with an expression of wonder. "Home," he said softly, as if testing the word. "Home," Evelyn agreed, "our home." They stood there together as the winter sun began its descent, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. And Evelyn knew, with a certainty that ran bone deep, that this was just the beginning. There would be hard times ahead, winter storms and crop failures and all the challenges that came with building a life on the frontier. But they would face those challenges together, as partners, as equals, as husband and wife in truth and not just on paper. She had ordered a husband and received a stranger with a gun. But that stranger had become her salvation, her strength, her home. And in the end, that was worth more than all the gentle farmers in the world. As they walked through the gate toward their cabin, toward the life they would build together, Evelyn looked back one last time at the road that had brought Wyatt to her. Then she closed the gate firmly behind them, shutting out the past and embracing the future. Their story, born in fear and forged in fire, had found its happy ending. Not the ending she had imagined on that dusty platform months ago, but something far better. Something real and hard-won and precious beyond measure. The gunfighter and the bride, the stranger and the woman who had dared to stand beside him, walked into their home together, and the door closed behind them on a world that would forever whisper their story, of courage found in unlikely places, of love born from necessity and tempered by trial, of two souls who found in each other exactly what they needed, even if it wasn't what they thought they wanted. In the gathering twilight, smoke rose from the chimney, warm light glowed in the windows, and Red Hollow settled into peaceful evening. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the prairie, carrying new strangers to new destinies. But in the small cabin on the edge of town, Evelyn and Wyatt Kane had already found theirs. Together.